Welcome to the channel. Today's story is about the night I realized my family did not see me as a daughter, but as an endless line of credit. My name is Harper Hayes. I am 31 years old, and I work as an internal auditor for a Fortune 500 logistics firm. My job is to look at massive amounts of data, find the discrepancies, and expose the liabilities. I am trained to remove emotion from the equation and look purely at the facts. But for 31 years, I failed to apply that same professional scrutiny to my own parents. That blind spot almost cost me my future, until one freezing Christmas Eve forced me to audit my own family. By the time my father, Richard, slid the glossy, itemized invoice across the dining table, I already knew this Christmas dinner had nothing to do with holiday cheer, gratitude, or family bonding. It was a calculated ambush, complete with roasted prime rib and a captive audience. My mother, Evelyn, stood near the head of the table. She wasn't playing the role of a warm hostess. She looked more like a corporate liquidator overseeing a hostile takeover. Sitting directly across from me was my younger sister, Chloe. She was 26, pouting beautifully, and wearing a breathtaking custom white silk gown. She sat there smiling like she was starring in her own movie, waiting for her supporting cast to hit their marks. There were nearly 60 people packed into my parents' sprawling estate in upstate New York. It was a blizzard outside, and the dining room was filled with uncles, aunts, cousins, family friends, and business associates. They were the kind of people who thoroughly enjoyed watching a family drama unfold, so long as their own crystal wine glasses remained full. The room grew eerily quiet as my father tapped his finger against the heavy cardstock of the invoice. $95,000, Harper, my father said, his voice carrying clearly over the soft instrumental Christmas music playing in the background. That is the remaining balance required to secure your younger sister's wedding venue, the floral arrangements, and the caterer. You will write the check tonight, or you will leave this house, and you will not come back. My mother immediately chimed in, her voice dripping with weaponized guilt. Every single person at this table agrees, Harper. You are the older sister. You have a lucrative career. You owe her this. It is your duty to step up when your family needs you. Chloe tilted her head, giving me that practiced, innocent smile that had gotten her out of trouble since kindergarten. I already told the vendors the money was coming from your accounts, Harper, she said smoothly. So, if you make a scene right now, you are really just embarrassing yourself and ruining my dream wedding. Don't be the Grinch today. I looked at Chloe. Then, I looked closely at the pristine white silk gown she was wearing. My chest tightened, not from sadness, but from a sudden, sharp clarity. It was a designer dress. It was also the exact same designer brand that had triggered a massive fraud alert on my secondary credit card just 3 months prior. A card I had immediately frozen. When I didn't reach for the designer pen my father had placed next to the invoice, my mother's patience snapped. She reached over, grabbed my dinner plate full of food, and shoved it onto the serving cart. People who don't contribute to this family don't get to eat at my table, she announced coldly. My father didn't shout. He just calmly reached across the tablecloth, picked up my car keys that I had set down earlier, and slipped them into his suit pocket. The roads are snowed in, Harper. Your car stays parked right where it is until you decide to act like a supportive sister and do the right thing. 60 relatives stared at me. I was the evening's entertainment. They were waiting to see if I would break, cry, or submit like I always did. I slowly stood up from my heavy oak chair, smoothed out my skirt, and looked my father dead in the eye. Before I tell you what I said next, and what happened after I walked out into the freezing snow, tell me something. Have you ever been treated like a mindless ATM by your own blood? Have you ever realized that your family's love was completely conditional on your wallet? Let me know in the comments, because I am very curious to see how many of you recognize this exact kind of extortion. I buttoned my winter coat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't beg for my keys. That absolute terrifying calm was the part that unsettled them the most. My father hated it when I was calm. Anger meant I was emotional, and emotional people can be manipulated. Calm meant I was calculating. "You might want to call those vendors, Chloe," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. "Because the credit card you tried to put on file for them is the exact same card you stole from me to buy that white silk dress, the card I flagged for identity theft." The entire room stayed frozen. You could hear the wind howling outside the window. Chloe let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh. "Oh my God, Harper, stop being so dramatic. You work in internal audits. You literally approve budgets 10 times this size every day. $95,000 is not going to bankrupt you. It's my wedding." I looked at her, and a small, genuine smile touched my face. That one sentence summarized the absolute dysfunction of the Hayes family. To them, my hard work, my late night studying, my salary, and my disciplined financial planning were not my own. They viewed my bank account as a communal asset. Anything I built was just a resource waiting to be liquidated whenever Chloe wanted something photogenic for her social media. "Chloe gets one chance to have the luxury wedding she deserves," my mother snapped, crossing her arms defensively. "And I get one chance to be treated like a human being instead of a slush fund," I replied. It seems we both came to dinner with unrealistic expectations. That was when my father decided to play what he clearly thought would be his winning hand. He stood up, towering over the table, and loudly began listing every single thing they had ever done for me, reading them off like line items on a corporate expense report. He listed the roof over my head when I was a teenager, my first used sedan that broke down after a year, and the groceries they bought when I lived at home. "You have lived selfishly for years," my father declared to the room. "We poured our blood, sweat, and resources into you, and the moment your sister needs a fraction of your success to start her life, you hoard it like a miser. You resent Chloe because she brings joy to people, and you just keep a ledger." I didn't argue. Arguing is what you do when you want to be understood. I no longer cared if these people understood me. "Keep the car keys, Richard," I said, dropping the title of Dad completely. "Because if I stay in this house for one more minute, I am going to stop protecting all of you." My mother's face instantly drained of color. She knew exactly what that meant. I turned my back on the 60 silent guests, walked out the front door, and stepped directly into the freezing New York blizzard. I didn't have my car. I didn't have a ride. I walked 1.5 miles in the snow in my formal heels until I reached a 24-hour diner where I could call a premium car service. People always imagine that cutting off a toxic family feels like a fiery, triumphant movie scene. It doesn't. Sometimes it feels like sitting in a vinyl booth at a fluorescent-lit diner at 1 a.m, shivering in your coat, and realizing that nobody in your bloodline gets to invoice your existence anymore. I booked a room at a business hotel 20 miles away. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold, and definitely not from fear. It was pure adrenaline. It was the physical release of dropping a burden I had been carrying for a decade. By the time I woke up on Christmas morning, my phone looked like a digital crime scene. There were 42 missed calls. Texts from my mother, voicemails from my father, and long, weeping voice notes from Chloe. There were even messages from distant cousins who had sat silently at the table watching me get humiliated, but who suddenly felt a deep moral calling to play mediator. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, the auditor in me woke up and clocked in. In my profession, we have a golden rule: document first, react second. I took screenshots of every text. I saved every voicemail to a secure cloud folder. I didn't do this out of paranoia. I did it because of history. You see, my calm reaction at that dinner table was not an accident. I had learned the hard way what my family was capable of. 2 years prior to this Christmas nightmare, I had received a strange piece of mail at my apartment. It was a late payment notice for a $45,000 luxury SUV. I didn't own an SUV. After a frantic morning of calling banks and pulling credit reports, I discovered the terrifying truth. My parents had co-signed a car loan for Chloe, but their credit wasn't strong enough to secure the premium interest rate she wanted. So, They used my social security number. They forged my digital signature as the primary guarantor. When I confronted them with the evidence, there were no apologies. There was only immediate, aggressive gaslighting. My mother told me I was overreacting. My father said they were just borrowing my good credit score and that they would never miss a payment. When I threatened to file a police report for identity theft, my mother threw herself on the floor weeping, screaming that I was trying to send my own family to federal prison over a technicality. I was 29 then. I caved. I swallowed the rage, forced them to refinance the car out of my name months later, and never spoke of it again. But that was the day the daughter in me died, and the auditor took over. I immediately placed a permanent security freeze on all my credit profiles. That freeze was the exact reason Chloe's attempt to use my secondary card to buy her wedding dress had bounced, and it was the reason they were now trying to extort cash from me in public. They could no longer steal from me in the shadows, so they tried to rob me in the spotlight. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to my father's voicemails. They shifted rapidly from aggressive commands to desperate bargaining. "Harper, call me back immediately," his voice barked in the first message. "You are having a mental breakdown. You need to come home before this becomes permanent." By the seventh voicemail, his tone had changed. "Harper, please. People are asking questions. Julian's family is starting to wonder where you went. We can figure out a payment plan. Just call me." Not a single message said, "We were wrong." Their pain was entirely logistical. The wedding timeline was collapsing. Their public image was cracking. I forwarded the last batch of threats to my secure folder, preparing to change my phone number, when a new text message popped up on my screen. It wasn't from my parents. It wasn't from Chloe. It was from an unknown number. But the preview text made my blood run instantly cold. "Hi, Harper. This is Caleb Vance, Julian's cousin. I know it is Christmas morning, but we need to talk urgently. Your parents have been making some massive financial promises to my uncle in your name. We need to clear this up before Julian's family loses any more money." Read that again. Before they lose any more money. I stared at the screen, the pieces rapidly snapping into place. My parents hadn't just tried to force me to pay for the venue. They had already dragged the Groom's family into their financial theater. I replied immediately with 3 words. "Where are you?" If my parents thought walking out of their dinner was the worst thing I could do, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson. I was no longer playing defense. It was time for a full-scale audit. I met Caleb Vance an hour later in the sterile, overly air-conditioned lobby of my hotel. It was Christmas morning, so the city was dead quiet, which made the gravity of our meeting feel even heavier. Before Caleb even arrived, a cousin of mine, who usually stayed out of the crossfire, sent me a batch of screenshots from Facebook and Instagram. My mother and Chloe had wasted no time. While I was pulling credit reports, they were building a public defense. My mother had posted a long, dramatic status update. "Spending this Christmas with a heavy heart. Please keep our eldest daughter, Harper, in your prayers. She is going through a severe emotional and mental health crisis and abruptly walked out on our family dinner last night. We love her unconditionally and only hope she gets the psychiatric help she desperately needs before she destroys her relationships." Right beneath it, Chloe had posted a carefully curated, teary-eyed selfie holding a mug of cocoa. The caption read, "Trying to stay positive and focus on my upcoming wedding despite the heartbreak. It is so hard when the sister you look up to loses her grip on reality." I stared at the screen. It was brilliantly manipulative. In the corporate auditing world, when executives know a whistleblower is about to expose massive fraud, their first tactic is always to assassinate the whistleblower's character. If the family could convince everyone I was clinically insane, then any financial crimes I exposed would just look like the paranoid delusions of a sick woman. But facts do not care about Facebook likes. Caleb walked through the revolving doors. He was a tall, sharp-looking guy who worked in commercial real estate, but today, he just looked exhausted. He wasn't some random knight in shining armor swooping in to save me. He was here because he had recognized a pattern, and he had the scars to prove it. 3 years ago, Chloe had convinced Caleb to put his credit card down for a luxury ski chalet for a group trip, swearing she would collect the cash from her friends and Venmo him by the end of the week. She never did. She ghosted him. My parents called it a misunderstanding between kids, and Caleb had to eat an $8,000 loss. He knew exactly what the Hayes family was capable of. He sat down across from me, bypassing any polite holiday greetings. Julian's parents are in a panic, Caleb said, keeping his voice low. Julian is totally blind to Chloe's red flags, but my aunt and uncle are old-school business people. They started smelling smoke last week when your mother started making excuses about venue payments. So, I started digging. How much money are they in for? I asked, my voice steady. Caleb ran a hand over his face. $35,000. They fronted the initial deposits for the country club, the luxury tent rentals, and the custom caterer. I frowned. Why would they do that? Julian's family is wealthy, but nobody just hands over $35,000 for a wedding that isn't even their side's responsibility. Because they were told it was a bridge loan, Caleb replied, leaning forward. Harper, your parents sat down with my aunt and uncle 2 months ago. They told them that you were the sole executor and beneficiary of a massive trust fund left by your maternal grandparents. They claimed you were fiercely private about your wealth, but that you had legally committed to financing the entire wedding as a tax-free gift to your sister. The lobby suddenly felt like it was spinning. A trust fund? My grandparents were wonderful, hard-working people, but they were public school teachers. They left behind some vintage furniture and a collection of ceramic birds, not a secret fortune. Evelyn told my family that your trust disbursements were tied up in a mandatory 30-day security hold because you were transferring assets, Caleb continued, pulling out his phone. She said if Julian's parents could just float the $35,000 for the deposits to lock in the dates, your trust officer would wire them a full reimbursement plus interest by Christmas Eve. He slid his phone across the table. It was an email thread between my mother and Julian's mother. I read my mother's words. Harper is so embarrassed by the banking delays, but she assures us the major costs are fully covered by the estate. She prefers not to discuss the money publicly to avoid awkwardness, so please do not bring it up to her at dinner. The reimbursement check will be cut this week. I felt a cold, calculating anger settle into my bones. This wasn't just a toxic family dynamic anymore. This was a textbook Ponzi scheme. They were using my name, my reputation for financial stability, and a completely fabricated inheritance to defraud another family. My mother told them not to bring it up to me under the guise of respecting my privacy, which ensured I would never find out I was supposed to be paying them back. And the demand for the $95,000 last night? That was the panic button. The venue deadlines were hitting. The Vance family was asking where their reimbursement was, and my parents had zero capital. Their entire house of cards relied on forcing me to sign that check under public pressure so they could cover their tracks before Julian's parents realized they had been conned. Julian knows something is wrong, Caleb said softly, but he thinks you're just being a difficult sister. My aunt and uncle, though, they feel like they have been dragged into a scam. They are humiliated. I looked up from the phone, meeting Caleb's eyes. They haven't just been dragged into a scam. They are the primary victims of wire fraud, and so am I. Before I tell you what I did next, think about this for a second. What would you do if you discovered your parents were using a fake inheritance in your name to run a high-stakes con? Would you confront them privately, or would you burn the entire operation to the ground? Let me know your thoughts, because my next move changed the trajectory of everyone's life. I slid the phone back to Caleb. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why my parents didn't love me enough to protect me. I shifted entirely into my role as an auditor. Caleb, I need you to arrange a meeting with Julian's parents tomorrow morning, I said, my tone completely devoid of emotion. No Julian, no Chloe, no Richard, no Evelyn, just me, your aunt, and your uncle. Caleb looked relieved for the first time since he sat down. Are you going to tell them the truth? I am going to do what I do best, I replied, pulling my coat tighter around my shoulders. I am going to present the documentation, clarify the liabilities, and let the stakeholders decide how to handle the fraud. I spent the rest of Christmas Day in my hotel room. While other families were opening presents and carving turkeys, I was building a comprehensive dossier. I compiled my credit reports showing the frozen accounts. I printed out the text messages from my father demanding money. I mapped out a timeline of their financial manipulation, starting from the forged car loan 2 years ago, right up to the Christmas Eve extortion attempt. I was about to walk into a room with wealthy, furious people who thought I owed them $35,000. I had to prove that I was not the mastermind of this scam. I was the collateral damage. I was about to rip the mask off the Hayes family permanently. The morning of December 26th was bitterly cold. The holiday cheer had completely evaporated, replaced by the sharp, unforgiving reality of a Tuesday. Caleb had arranged the meeting at his uncle's private wealth management firm in downtown Manhattan. When I walked into the mahogany-paneled boardroom, Arthur and Eleanor Vance were already seated. Julian's parents were old money, the kind of people who wore bespoke cashmere and expressed anger through terrifying, absolute silence. They did not look like future in-laws waiting to discuss wedding centerpieces. They looked like a tribunal. Caleb sat in the corner, offering me a tight, supportive nod. Arthur Vance didn't bother with pleasantries. He clasped his hands on the polished table and stared at me. Harper, I am going to be very direct. Your mother assured us the wire transfer from your trust would clear yesterday morning. It did not. We are currently exposed for $35,000 on a wedding that is not our financial responsibility. I want to know exactly when that money will be deposited into my account. Eleanor Vance looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain, clearly having read my mother's Facebook post about my supposed mental health crisis. I did not flinch. I unzipped my leather briefcase and pulled out 3 thick, identically bound dossiers. I slid one over to Arthur, one to Eleanor, and kept one for myself. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, I said, my voice completely steady. I am not here to negotiate a repayment schedule. I am here to present the findings of an internal audit regarding the financial representations made to you by Richard and Evelyn Hayes. Please open to page 1. Arthur frowned, clearly insulted by my tone, but he opened the folder. Eleanor did the same. First, I began, looking them dead in the eye. There is no trust fund. My maternal grandparents were wonderful people who worked as public school teachers in Ohio for 40 years. They left behind a modest pension that covered their end-of-life care, and a small house that was sold a decade ago. There is no hidden wealth. There is no estate manager. I am not, and have never been, a financial beneficiary capable of funding a luxury wedding. Eleanor let out a sharp gasp. Arthur's head snapped up. Evelyn sat in our living room and told us the trust was tied up in a mandatory 30-day security hold. That was a calculated lie, I replied cleanly. Turn to page 4. I walked them through the documentation, just as I would brief a corporate board on embezzlement. I showed them the flagged credit alert from 3 months ago, proving that Chloe had attempted to use my secondary card to purchase her designer wedding dress without my consent. Then, I turned to the darkest chapter. I showed them the police report and the credit dispute paperwork from 2 years ago, detailing how my parents had forged my signature to secure a $45,000 auto loan for Chloe. This is not a misunderstanding, Mr. Vance. This is an established pattern of identity theft and financial manipulation, I explained. I placed a permanent freeze on my credit after the car incident. When Chloe's attempt to buy her dress bounced and the venue deadlines began closing in, my parents panicked. They realized they had already promised you a reimbursement they could never afford. So they cornered me at Christmas dinner. I pulled out my phone, placed it in the center of the table, and played the voicemail my father had left me the previous night. The one where his aggressive commands shifted into desperate begging because the Vances were asking questions. Have you ever watched a perfectly constructed lie collapse in real time? It is terrifyingly quiet. You can actually see the exact moment a person's worldview shatters and rearranges itself. Eleanor Vance leaned back in her leather chair, her face turning pale. She pulled out her own phone and pulled up my mother's Facebook page. "The mental health crisis," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with sudden realization. "Evelyn posted that you were having a severe psychological breakdown. She texted me this morning saying we shouldn't believe anything you say because you were off your medication." "Preemptive character assassination," I said flatly. "If I am crazy, then I am not a credible witness to wire fraud." Arthur Vance did not say a word for a long time. He just stared at the documents in front of him. When he finally looked up, the anger in his eyes was no longer directed at me. It was the cold, lethal fury of a highly intelligent, powerful man who realized his intellect had been insulted by amateurs. "They thought," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "that they could use my son's wedding to extract nearly $100,000 from you and use my bank account as a bridge loan while they applied the pressure. They treated my family like a line of credit." "Yes, sir," I said. "And I am deeply sorry that my family dragged yours into their performance." Arthur closed the dossier. He didn't yell. He didn't pound his fist on the table. He simply picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. "Gordon," Arthur said, presumably speaking to his lead attorney. "I need you to draft a cease and desist order directed at Richard and Evelyn Hayes. Next, call the country club, the luxury rental vendor, and the caterer. Cancel all outstanding authorizations under the Vance name immediately. Dispute the initial $35,000 deposit under grounds of fraudulent inducement." He paused, his eyes locked on mine. "And Gordon? Draft a formal notification of termination of the engagement. Julian will not be marrying into this family." Eleanor didn't argue. She just closed her eyes and nodded in agreement. They were cutting the cord instantly to protect their son and their assets. As Arthur hung up the phone, I gathered my things. "You should be prepared," I told them. "When Richard and Evelyn realize the money is gone, they will not quietly accept defeat. They will escalate. They will try to destroy whatever they can." Arthur Vance stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Let them try, Harper," Arthur said. "Your parents have spent their entire lives manipulating people who loved them. They have absolutely no idea what happens when they try to manipulate someone who has better lawyers than they do." I walked out of that boardroom, feeling something I had not felt in 31 years. I felt weightless. The Hayes family had built a beautiful, expensive bomb, strapped it to my chest, and told everyone it was a gift. But I had just handed the detonator to Arthur Vance, and he was about to press the button. The speed at which generational wealth moves is truly terrifying if you happen to be on the wrong side of it. Arthur Vance did not wait for the holidays to end. By noon on December 26th, his legal team had executed a flawless, surgical strike. They drafted formal notices of fraudulent inducement to every major vendor associated with the wedding. They froze the initial $35,000 deposit, initiating a massive chargeback through their private bank, citing deceptive financial practices by the Hayes family. And just like that, the golden carriage turned back into a pumpkin. The ripple effect was instantaneous. The vendors, the elite country club, the custom floral designer, the luxury tent rental company, suddenly realized that the billionaire Vance family was no longer backing the event. Panic set in. They immediately pulled the original contracts to see who was actually liable for the remaining balances and cancellation penalties. Those contracts were signed by two people: my father, Richard, and my sister, Chloe. Because the wedding was only weeks away, the cancellation clauses were absolute. The custom silk draping had already been cut. The imported flowers were already on cargo planes. The catering minimums were locked. Within 24 hours, my parents were hit with a tidal wave of breach of contract notices and penalty invoices. The total liability was staggering. It wasn't just the $95,000 they had tried to extort from me at Christmas dinner. With the Vance family pulling their $35,000, plus late fees and legal penalties, my parents were suddenly staring down the barrel of over $130,000 in immediate debt. When toxic people lose control of a narrative, they do not self-reflect. They seek a target to destroy. Since my parents could not manipulate or intimidate Arthur Vance, they turned their absolute fury toward the one person they were used to breaking: me. If they were going to go down, they were going to drag me into the mud with them. At 9 a.m. on December 28th, my mother sent a frantic, highly defamatory email to the vice president of internal audit at my logistics firm. She used her personal email address, but formatted it like a legal warning. She claimed that I had embezzled family funds, that I was suffering from severe paranoid delusions, and that the company needed to immediately suspend my access to sensitive financial data before I compromised their clients. 10 minutes later, my father bypassed the receptionist and aggressively dialed his way into the office of my managing director, a hardened, no-nonsense corporate auditor named Marcus. My parents truly believed that the corporate world operated like our family dining room. They thought whoever screamed the loudest and cried the hardest would automatically win. They thought professionalism was just a costume I wore, and that the moment they called me a thief, my bosses would fire me out of sheer embarrassment. They had no idea what it looked like when a billion-dollar institution actually protects its assets. What my parents didn't know was that on Christmas morning, right after I froze my credit and before I met with Caleb Vance, I had utilized my company's legal protection protocols. I had filed a preemptive disclosure report with our HR and legal departments. I submitted the police reports from the forged car loan 2 years ago, the flagged credit alerts, and a formal notification that I was currently the target of familial financial extortion and anticipated workplace retaliation. When my mother's email arrived, it didn't trigger a panic. It triggered a spam filter and a forward to the corporate legal team, who documented it as evidence of harassment. When my father got Marcus on the phone, the conversation did not go the way Richard Hayes expected. Marcus called me into his office, put the phone on a secure speaker, and hit record. "Mr. Hayes," Marcus said, his voice cold and flat. "You are speaking to the managing director of internal audit. I understand you are making allegations regarding Harper's integrity." "She is unstable, Marcus," my father barked through the phone, using his best authoritative voice. "She has stolen from her own family, and she is fabricating lies to cover her tracks. As a father, I am warning you, you need to suspend her immediately." Marcus didn't miss a beat. "Mr. Hayes, Harper is one of our senior auditors. She has already provided this firm with heavily documented proof of identity theft and financial fraud perpetrated against her by you and your wife. We have reviewed the police reports regarding the forged auto loan. We have documented this phone call." The line went dead silent. My father was not used to people who demanded receipts. "I am going to make this very clear," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly professional register. "Harper is a valued, protected employee of this corporation. If you, your wife, or anyone in your family contacts this firm again, emails our staff, or attempts to damage Harper's professional reputation, our corporate legal department will immediately file a restraining order and pursue civil damages for tortious interference. Do you understand me, Richard?" My father stammered. You don't understand family dynamics." "I understand liability," Marcus replied sharply. "And right now, you are a massive one. Do not call this number again." Marcus hung up the phone. He looked at me, shook his head, and said, "Go back to work, Harper. We've got you." I walked back to my desk, and for the first time in days, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Before we get to the final fallout and what happened to my sister, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a toxic family member try to sabotage your career, your relationships, or your reputation simply because you stopped giving them what they wanted? How did you handle the retaliation? Tell me your story in the comments, because navigating that kind of betrayal is one of the hardest things a person can do. That phone call was the exact moment the Hayes family facade completely collapsed. My father finally realized the horrifying truth. He had absolutely zero power in my world. He could not take my keys. He could not throw my dinner in the trash. He could not force me to sign a check. Out here, in the real world, I wasn't just his obedient eldest daughter. I was a professional who was respected, believed, and protected by people far more powerful than he would ever be. By the end of that week, the wedding was officially, publicly canceled. Julian Vance ended the engagement through a brutally short letter drafted by his lawyers, citing a material misrepresentation of character and an irreparable loss of trust. My parents had tried to force me into a lifelong payment plan to fund their favorite child's fantasy. Instead, they had forced their golden child into a spectacular public collapse, and they had bought themselves a $130,000 nightmare. And still, the story wasn't quite over. Because a few days later, my sister Chloe showed up at my apartment building, and she was not wearing her designer clothes or her practiced smile. It was raining heavily on New Year's Eve when the lobby concierge of my apartment building called up to my unit. He told me my sister was downstairs, crying, and asking to come up. I did not invite her into my home. My apartment was my sanctuary, and I refused to let the Hayes family chaos cross my threshold ever again. Instead, I put on my coat and met her down in the lobby. When the elevator doors opened, I almost didn't recognize her. The Chloe who had sat in a custom silk gown at Christmas dinner, demanding $95,000 with a smug smile, was entirely gone. She was wearing a baggy sweatshirt, no makeup, and her face was swollen from days of crying. She looked exactly like what she actually was, a 26-year-old woman who suddenly had to face the real world without a safety net. She stood up when she saw me, her hands trembling. "Harper, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Julian won't even speak to me. His lawyers sent me a box with my belongings. Mom and Dad are screaming at each other every day. The country club is threatening to sue us. My life is completely ruined." I stood a few feet away from her, keeping my distance. "Your wedding is ruined, Chloe, not your life. You are young, healthy, and capable of getting a job to pay off your debts." She shook her head frantically. "But I didn't know how bad it was. Mom and Dad told me they had a plan. They told me you would eventually cave and pay for it. I didn't know they were lying to the Vances about a trust fund." "You knew there was no trust fund," I corrected her, my voice perfectly calm. "You knew I was never going to pay for that wedding. You just didn't care how they got the money out of me, as long as you got to walk down the aisle looking like a millionaire." Chloe burst into heavy sobs. She slid down onto one of the lobby sofas and covered her face. And then, she said the one thing that proved she was finally starting to understand the reality of her situation. "They are blaming me," Chloe choked out. "Mom told her friends that I was a bridezilla who pushed them into debt. Dad said I ruined his reputation. They are using me to shield themselves, Harper, just like they used to use you." I looked at her, and for a brief second, I felt a microscopic wave of pity. In toxic family systems, the roles of the golden child and the scapegoat are not permanent. They are simply tactical assignments. For 31 years, I was the scapegoat who carried the financial and emotional weight so my parents could pretend to be perfect. The moment I walked away and refused to carry it, the weight crushed the next person in line. "I am sorry they are doing that to you, Chloe," I said quietly. "But I am not coming back to fix it." She looked up, her eyes wide with desperation. "Are you ever going to forgive me?" "Forgiveness is a luxury you ask for when you have learned your lesson," I replied. "Right now, you are just looking for a rescue. I don't hate you, Chloe. I really don't. But I am closing the ledger on this family. The audit is done." I turned around and walked back to the elevator. I didn't look back. I didn't let my phone ring itself into exhaustion anymore. I simply changed my number the next morning. The fallout for Richard and Evelyn Hayes was absolute and unforgiving. Because Arthur Vance had initiated legal challenges regarding the fraudulent deposits, My parents could not quietly sweep the canceled wedding under the rug. To avoid being dragged into civil court by the vendors, they had to liquidate actual assets. My father was forced to sell his prized vintage car collection. My mother had to drastically downsize, selling the upstate estate where that disastrous Christmas dinner took place. They moved into a modest condo, financially drained and completely exiled from their wealthy social circles. The Vances had made sure everyone in their country club knew exactly why the wedding was canceled. The ultimate irony was poetic. My parents spent years treating me like a private emergency fund to finance the illusion of wealth. In the end, trying to rob me was the exact thing that cost them every dime they actually had. As for me, I took a promotion 3 months later and relocated to a regional office in Chicago. I leased a beautiful high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I bought a massive solid oak dining table. The next Christmas, I hosted dinner at that table. I invited friends, colleagues, and neighbors. We drank good wine, ate terrible appetizers, and laughed until our ribs hurt. Halfway through the evening, I looked around the room and realized something profound. Nobody at my table was keeping a ledger. Nobody was testing my loyalty. Nobody was demanding a check to prove my love. Peace, when you have never experienced it, feels strangely quiet at first. But once you get used to it, you realize it is the most expensive thing you will ever own, and you will never let anyone steal it from you again. I want to leave you with this final thought. People will often tell you that family is everything, and that you must always forgive blood. But toxic families do not collapse because you attack them. They collapse because you simply stop carrying the consequences of their lies. The moment you put down the burden they forced onto your back, they will call you cruel. They will call you selfish. They will call you dramatic. They will call you everything except what you truly are: free. If you were in my shoes, what would you have chosen? The comfortable misery of being the family ATM, or the terrifying freedom of walking away in the snow? Let me know your choice in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about surviving the unimaginable and taking your life back. Until next time, stay strong, know your worth, and never let anyone forge your signature on the story of your life.